Hello and welcome back to the Butter Web Design Podcast. My name is Ryan Lowe, and today we're going to be talking about whether or not you need a full redesign, or if there are ways of fixing up your existing website to make it look sharp without having to totally redo it. So how are we going to decide these things? Well, let's look at one of the easiest hints from the right off the hop here. Is your website embarrassing for you? Are you going on your website and realizing that you have emotions of shame? That's a pretty good sign that your website needs to just totally be rebuilt. If it hasn't been addressed in 5 or 6 years, it's probably not going to migrate nicely into something like a new WordPress theme, and as such, you probably just want to build from scratch. That's going to be cheaper in the long run and less of a headache, especially for the person rebuilding it. So that's the first way to tell, is if your website is embarrassing. But if it's not obvious to you, then here are some ideas for how to tell whether or not your website can be salvaged with what you have, or if you should start fresh. The first one to look at is whether your website is using a boxed layout or if it's full width. They can be distinguished by looking at whether or not your website's content stretches to reach the full width of the page. Boxed websites look stale, they look a bit older, and sometimes they're not even mobile friendly. And if that's the case, then the code that would need to be added to make it mobile friendly is going to require building from scratch. So you would take the salvageable content from that existing website and you would bring that into a new type of code that allows the content to stretch for wider screens and to compress for narrower screens. If your website has a fluid width, meaning that the content like if you click and drag the browser window and make it really narrow, if the content collapses nicely and reorganizes itself to fit a vertical layout as if it were on a tablet or a phone, you've probably got a responsive layout in place. And if you know your website is built in WordPress, then you may get away with just updating your theme. Right now, there are several themes, Divi, Elementor, amongst others, that are able to allow you to make front-end visual edits, meaning there's a visual editor that allows you to essentially drag and drop content around on your website and make changes yourself if that's something that you're interested in doing. Now, you may need somebody to set that up for you, but once that's in place, it's more comprehensive now than it's ever been for making your own website updates. Another solid hint that your website is quite old and needs an update is if it has solid color as the background, dated graphics, and the copyright year is a pretty dead giveaway as well. If you scroll all the way to the bottom of your website and look at the copyright year and it says 2014, you probably need to rebuild it. If it says 2017 or 2016, if it's something that you're not sure when it was built, you can always check that copyright year. Another hint at whether or not you need that website to be fully redesigned and rebuilt is to take a look at the doc type. The doc type is at the very top of the source code. So if you right click on your page and go to the very top of the page, and if you see the code that starts all of that code, try not to be intimidated by the fact that you're looking at code. You only need to look at that first line. And on line 1, there will be a doc type declaration. And all that is it tells the rendering aspect of the computer. So if the browser is rendering this code, which it usually is, it says, okay, this is the type of code we're using. This is the type of HTML the website is built with. And what you want to see is an angle bracket and then an exclamation mark and then the word doc type followed by HTML and then a closing angle bracket. It should be a nice short doc type. That refers to or that indicates that your website is built in HTML5. Now, if your website says something like transitional in the doc type, or if it's a longer doc type and a lot wordier, then you probably have an older version of HTML5, and that's going to require that you update to, or that's not HTML5 that you're using at all, that might be a version of HTML4. So updating to HTML5 is a good idea because it gives your web designer the opportunity to use more semantic tagging. You're able to give more structure to the website from a machine readable standpoint, and you're going to give search engines better hints as to what your content is about. And this is useful because in previous versions of HTML, the code wasn't necessarily structured in a way that was very friendly for search engines to read, and that changed in HTML5. HTML5 gives many more types of tags to the web designer to use to describe exactly what that content is. And as a result, the search engines reward those websites that were built in that manner with a higher search position. So if search positions are useful to you, which they probably are, they're useful for everybody, you want to be found online, updating to HTML5 should definitely be a priority for you. And to review, you can see whether or not your website has been built in HTML5 by right-clicking your website, going to the option that says View Page Source or View Source, and then at the very top of the code you can see the doc type. And if it's a short doc type with exclamation mark doc type HTML, that's HTML5, and that's what you want to see. So to wrap this up, if your website is already pretty modern, you're happy with all the content that you have existing on the website already, and really all you want is to just make subtle changes to sharpen up the website. You know it's responsive, you know it's in HTML5, you might not need a redesign, like a total redesign. If it's built in WordPress, then you can probably get away with updating your theme to one of those themes featuring a modern front-end visual editor such as Divi or Elementor. Now, if your website has fallen into disrepair and is featuring solid color backgrounds, stale font choices, non-responsive layouts, boxed layouts, or is explicitly saying at the bottom with the copyright year that it was built in 2014, you probably want to just rebuild the whole thing. You can migrate the text that's useful for you, but chances are you're going to want to update that text too. So those are ways of deciding whether or not to redesign the website, rebuild entirely, or simply update your theme. Thanks for listening, and if you would like more of this content, subscribe to the podcast if that's how you're consuming it. If you watch the video, hit the thumbs up. Remember to subscribe. If you leave comments on the blog article itself on butterwebdesign.com, I'll get to those. Thanks.